Fun fact, initially many people thought that Mash's name was Matthew because the spelling of the name in katakana is the same. This also isn't the first time Mash has had something of an identity crisis. The Shielder class is one that goes all the way back to Stay Night as a potential class of servants, but for one reason or another was scrapped time and time again. In these initial stages, her name was going to instead be Tachie, though this concept never saw the light of day. Additionally, this famous CE, the Dangerous Beast CE, which spawned more fan art than some servants will ever receive and has spanned outside of the Fate franchise, is confirmed to be something Mash canonically wore. This is mentioned in an event as something that she is incredibly embarrassed about, though not entirely unwilling to do. Fun fact, in France it was believed that King Arthur was killed and replaced by a cat. The story goes that one day King Arthur was asked to deal with a monstrous cat called a Cathpalug, and so went off to do battle with it. However, the creature simply kicked the great king into a swamp where he perished. The cat then took the form of King Arthur and returned to Camelot where no one was the wiser. On top of weird cats, Arthur was also fighting another weird animal, dog-headed men, known as Cynocephali. In ye olden times, this was often just meant to mean non-Christians, and a good deal of art depicts enemies of the church as such. Supposedly Arthur, along with his most trusted knight Bedivere, slew hundreds of these medieval furries in the mountains of Aedion. Fun fact, Saber Lily is the product of Medea completely taming Saber. Kind of. This was an ongoing joke between Gen Urabochi and Nasu when they originally designed Lily as an alternate form for Saber in Fate Unlimited codes, aka fuck. They based her design on the dress that Medea puts on Saber in Fate Stay Night, and then further changed it to look more girly, by giving it a Lily-like frill design, hence the name. Saber Lily is meant to work as the antithesis of Saber Alter, being a creature of pure good and joy, against Salter's brooding darkness. Lily was meant to exemplify the more feminine and girly parts of Saber that her initial design lacked, giving her an even greater air of purity. As such, even when she appears in other material like Grand Carnival, she is seen as a beacon of joy untainted by evil. Fun fact, Saber Alter's love of junk food likely comes from the writer's association with fast food and evil. On more than one occasion in the writing and anime, there is a comparison of fine dining with the objectively good and junk food with the objectively evil. Because of this, Salter is described as literally spitting out properly made cooking in favor of eating junk food. This is believed to be because she is no longer eating for taste but simply for energy, and fast food tends to be packed full of calories. Also, while not considered explicitly canon as it appears in Fate Grand Carnival, removing normal Saber's Ahoge seems to cause her to become an Alter, hence why none of the Saber Alter variants that exist have one, and why every Artoria variant does. This means, in theory, that Saber's Ahoge would be considered a noble phantasm in and of itself, able to alter her form depending on if it is attached or not, almost like Atalanta and Atalanta Alter. Fun fact, after his death, 3 different people claimed to be the reincarnation of Nero in order to use his authority for their own gain. Nero famously fled into the wilderness in the year 68, where he shuffled off his own mortal coil. However, anytime a larger-than-life figure passes away, regardless of if you love them or hate them, rumors are abound that they actually survive. The first imposter was a man who committed acts of piracy while claiming to be Nero, and asked for Roman troops to assist him. This man was caught and beheaded with his head being shipped around Europe. The second imposter, a man named Teratius Maximus, actually looked and sang like Nero, and gained followers and support to challenge the then Emperor Titus. However, his identity was revealed and he was also executed. The third man came around 20 years after Nero died, and was almost the cause of a war when the country housing him wouldn't give him up. Fun fact, Siegfried's artist, Otosuke Konoe, is on record stating that every time he has to draw the Dragon Slayer's armor, it kills his arm due to the amount of lines that he has to add every single time. This is in part because he was not the original designer for Siegfried, which was the artist KN, as Siegfried was originally meant to be a part of the online Fate Apocrypha game that never came to fruition. Siegfried is also the favorite servant of the Fate Apocrypha author, Yuichiro Higashide, to the point that Nasu has gone on record calling him creepy. Fun fact, Caesar's father and grandfather supposedly both died while putting on shoes. This is believed to be because their family had a long-running cardiovascular problem. It has been a hot topic for historians as to whether Caesar was epileptic or simply had epileptic-like episodes. One such believed cause is that he had a parasitic worm that caused these issues. On top of these abnormal medical issues, Caesar also suffered from a very normal one: baldness, which he was supposedly very sensitive about. To counter this, supposedly he would comb his hair over and wear a laurel wreath to hide his ailment. Fun fact, Altera's sword, the Sword of Mars, was supposedly originally a Scythian holy sword that gave its wielder the right to be the prince of the whole world. While it may seem weird for a war god sword to give one kingship, it is because the sword's original name was more closely translated to the Sword of God. The sword still exists to this day, or at least there is one that is claiming to be the sword. The Sword of Mars was given to Otto, the Duke of Bavaria, by Anastasia of Kiev, and further passed down through the generations. As of now, it is in Vienna, Austria on display at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Unlike in Fate though, this sword appears to be a cavalry saber rather than a rainbow broadsword. Fun fact, Gilles de Rais was once scared so badly by a demon that he fled his castle. Gilles was a very religious man, which makes sense given who his historical ally was. Despite this, he was known to dabble in the darker part of Christianity and would hire magicians and warlocks to try and take advantage of the diabolical. Normally, the people he brought in were hucksters and parlor magicians able to perform sleight of hand but nothing of substance, to which Gilles would pay them and then send them on their way. However, on one occasion a man told him that he was able to conjure a demon. Supposedly, this man actually managed to pull it off, and it frightened the serial killer general so badly that he fled the room and demanded the man to leave. This is not to be confused with Prelati, who made the same claim but could not produce the results. Fun fact, Daon's relationship with Marie Antoinette and the French royal family may be significantly more strained than FGO would make you believe. In the early days of their service as a knight and spy, Daon certainly held a greater influence and respect in the royal courts, even being asked to help draw up a peace treaty for the 7 Years' War. But after a political misstep, they were banished from France and made to live in England, a fate worse than death. Here they would attempt to continue their political and military efforts, such as attempting to assist in the American War of Independence, but either due to their banishment or their identification as a woman, they were denied. Fun fact, despite Emiya's ability to project various weapons, as seen by his projecting of the sword Gae, his bow is a completely original invention. It takes on a more western design and is strong enough to be able to fire various noble phantasm level arrows despite its unassuming appearance. Archer himself has an effective range of about 4 kilometers and prefers to be at a much longer range to fight. Despite this, as he appears in FGO, Archer is more of a melee unit using his dual bows Kansho and Bakuya, which are also not Fate original inventions. These are projections of 2 swords that are of Chinese origin that were forged over the course of 3 years and ultimately resulted in the death of their creators, the creator's son, the king who commissioned them, and the assassin who killed the king. Fun fact, while the mythological Gilgamesh is credited with a number of amazing feats such as slaying demons and divine bovines, the historical Gilgamesh is credited with a much more mundane but still very important achievement for the time. He was the one who had the walls built around the city of Uruk. While in the modern age the construction of walls to keep enemies out is more symbolic than anything, given our technological advancements, the construction of an ancient wall around an entire city served as a great way to prevent bandits or any nations from simply running through your city. Also, upon his death, Gilgamesh was buried under a river as the workmen of Uruk diverted the flow of the river to bury him before putting it back to how it was. Fun fact, Robin Hood's noble phantasm, No-Face May King, may seem like a translation error, but is actually rooted in British folklore. The no-face aspect comes from the historical fact that no one knows who the original writer of Robin Hood was, or if he was truly real, and the in-game explanation of Robin Hood being a title, not a person. Therefore, every Robin Hood is different, but the same. The May King is in reference to May Day and the crowning of a May Queen. While there is no May King, there is a Jack in Green, which is the equivalent. Robin Hood was also an integral feature to many medieval May Day festivals, with many people dressing up as the King in Green. Fun fact, Atalanta's cat ears and tail are actually those of a lion. This is because in Atalanta's legend, after she was defeated in a foot race by Hippomenes, thus becoming his bride, Hippomenes forgot to thank Aphrodite for her assistance, Aphrodite being the one who gave him the golden apples that served to distract Atalanta, allowing him to win. As punishment, the love goddess afflicted Atalanta and Hippomenes with severe horniness, and the two had sex on sacred ground. This drew the ire of Artemis, who Atalanta had made a vow of chastity to, who turned them both into lions. Why lions, you may ask? Because the Greeks believed that lions were unable to mate with one another and could only have kids with leopards. In some versions, Atalanta also has a son. Fun fact, the 2 elder Gorgon sisters, Steno and Uriel, have inverse designs. Initially, when they were being drawn for FGO, their artist, Akira, was going to simply mirror them against one another with only minor changes. This is because, in canon, the 2 are supposed to be nearly identical perfect beings. However, as the illustration process continued, more and more little changes began to develop. Steno gained her famous devious smile, Uriel became more energetic in appearance, and their clothing went in opposite directions. Steno's dress has a more inward appearance and Uriel's faces downwards. In this way, it is now possible to identify the Gorgon sisters separately. Fun fact, in one telling of Arash's myth, the firing of the arrow doesn't kill him. Instead, he is regarded as a great hero by those around him and given a promotion to become the head of the archers, where he lived out the rest of his life with these honors. Of course, most tales include his sacrifice, but have you ever wondered why he is resistant to poison? This is due to anecdotes that Arash had never once been injured on the battlefield and had also never once been sick. It could also have something to do with the various blessings given to him when he was preparing for his country-saving shot. Fun fact, Ku once had an affair with Manon MacLear's wife. Ku, like many ancient heroes, had several lovers despite being married. His wife Ymir, for the most part, didn't mind though. That is, until he fell in love with Manon's wife, the fairy Fond. He defended her from Phoemerian assailants and the two fell deeply in love. Ymir went to reclaim her husband, but after seeing how in love they were, gave up and planned to return home alone. Fond felt pity for Ymir and decided to return to Manon, who then wiped Ku and Fond's memories of the affair and cursed them to never meet again. Fun fact, Liz's third ascension was designed to be something like a final concert kind of sprite. It was purposefully meant to be over the top and flashy, something that stands out with how outrageous it is. Wada Arco, the character designer for Liz, remarked on her initial illustrations of this third ascension that she was rather satisfied. That is, until she was told that servants were unable to have their forms selected. In the earliest days of FGO, once you ascended, you couldn't go back, meaning that people who had maxed out their Liz were stuck with this over-the-top design, causing Wada Arco to panic. However, as we now know, this would eventually be changed. Fun fact, despite Benkei's enormous stature and violent nature, he is renowned for his amazingly quick wit. A famous anecdote about Benkei is the tale of the subscription list. He and Ushiwakamaru were attempting to disguise themselves as mountain monks when a local lord suspected them of trickery. Benkei claimed that they were seeking donations for the rebuilding of a temple in Nara and produced a blank subscription scroll. He began loudly reading out names and locations of donors as proof of their good work, and did so as his party marched on. Impressed and believing the wandering group's bluff, they were permitted to pass. Fun fact, Ku's beloved spear, Gae Bolg, is not originally meant to be used as a traditional spear. Gae Bolg, if used just as a normal spear, was still particularly deadly. However, under a secret technique taught to him by Skahawk, one could unlock its true potential. If thrown in a certain way with the foot, the spear would pierce its target and then branch out into 30 barbs all around. In this way, it was incredibly painful if not outright lethal in its execution, and could only be removed by cutting away the flesh around the barbs. Proto-Ku himself initially uses a different spear in Prototype because the famed spear itself would give away his identity too easily. Fun fact, despite the infamy of Leonidas and his army of 300 Spartans holding the line at Thermopylae, this number is actually incorrect. Kind of. While there were 300 Spartans, there were also 4,000 to 7,000 Greeks on his side as well. As the battle waged on and it became clear that they were going to lose, Leonidas sent the majority of the soldiers back, save for his Spartans, but was still joined by about 2,000 other soldiers. This decision to send away the majority of his troops is also why Leonidas, despite being a bit of a meathead in fate, is still renowned for his intellect. He deduced that he would lose, and so he had to calculate the correct number to hold the line the longest amount of time before giving in. Fun fact, there isn't an agreed upon way in which Romulus died. Two of the most prominent theories involve him just up and vanishing. One of these is that while he was inspecting his troops, a massive gale surrounded him, and after it was finished, the king had vanished. The other is that the gods quite literally picked him up from the ground and took him to the heavens, where he currently resides as divinity. The latter was a popular theory because it meant that the Romans had the favor of the divine. The other theory is that he was assassinated by jealous officials after he had been so successful for so many years, with his body then torn apart and disposed of. Fun fact, in her original conception, Medusa, as well as her sisters, were always simply hideous monsters. The invention of Medusa as a tragic figure turned into monster comes from Ovid, who wrote about her somewhere in the 1st century BCE. The Medusa myth predates this by at least 500 years, but most certainly longer. However, the concept of Medusa not being hideous, but instead alluring, has been around in a popular fixture for artists and potters since before 500 BCE. In other words, much like in the modern age, the monster that was once meant to frighten became an object of affection. Fun fact, St. George's slaying of the dragon is actually a Christian retelling of a non-Christian story. In fact, we actually have the supposed princess in George's story in Chaldea right now. Andromeda. The tale of George and the Dragon is that he comes across a weeping princess, who tells him that she is being sacrificed to the beast to appease it. George chooses to stay behind and slay the beast, thus saving the girl. This is nearly identical to the tale of Perseus and Andromeda, except slot out a dragon for a sea monster. Fun fact, at one point in time, Blackbeard actually gave up being a pirate. After his famous blockade of Charlestown, the governor of South Carolina wanted to get rid of the pirate. Overwhelming force was a no-go because of the lack of resources and Blackbeard's own cunning. To the governor's surprise, Blackbeard himself approached the governor seeking a pardon as a part of the anti-pirating Acts of Grace movement. Essentially, if he just stopped being a pirate, they'd let him go. For a while, he tried the honest life of a privateer, but soon fell back into his old ways, which would eventually lead him to his death. Fun fact, while Boudica was a known figure to the British for over a millennia and served as a symbol of freedom, she became a national symbol of resistance thanks to a poem by William Cowper titled Boudica, an Ode. Ironically enough, she seemed to become associated with imperialism, Boudica's resistance becoming one of reclaiming what was once the Brits. In fact, several more poets seem to project the 18th century British ideals onto her, including those of Christianity, all to make her a guiding goddess of victory. Fun fact, Ushi's Tengu-like traits and associations originate in a Noh play called Kurama Tengu. In the play, a group of children and monks from the Kurama temple are viewing the cherry blossoms when a giant mountain aesthetic arrives. This sours the mood for the group, who all disperse save for one person, the recently orphaned Ushiwaka. The monk reveals himself to be the leader of the Tengu of Mount Kurama and offers to train the young Ushi. Gladly accepting, this is how Ushi supposedly learned martial arts and their military strategies. Fun fact, according to legend, on the day before Olympias, mother of Alexander the Great, was set to consummate her marriage, she dreamed that her womb was struck by lightning, causing a great fire to manifest across the land. Aside from the obvious prophetic aspects of him becoming a conqueror, this is part of the reason why Alexander has control over lightning in FGO. The lightning itself is said to have originated from Zeus, giving the young boy the power and blessings of the gods. While information on the heroic spirit Alexander is somewhat scarce, there is one interesting note that can be found in his bond lines. That is that his horse, Bucephalus, is not a noble phantasm, but is itself a heroic spirit. This means that it is possible to summon just the horse alone in the future. Fun fact, Marie appears as a 14-year-old girl because this is the time right before she would have been married. Marie is meant to be symbolic of a more pure side of the French queen, with her artist, Jing Ke, describing her as an idol. Her unique outfit and large hat are meant to reflect this as well, as Marie famously helped revolutionize celebrity fashion during her time. That said, Jing Ke does mention that they may have overdone it with the hat. Another fun little note with Marie is that she particularly loved chocolate, to the point where she would even travel with her royal chocolatier. She would also take many of her medicines in a chocolate coin form called a pistole, which can still be bought today at the Debout and Galais in Paris. Fun fact, Martha's association with France comes from a 13th century tale called the Golden Legend, which claims that she, her sister Mary, and her brother Lazarus all traveled to Avignon after the resurrection of Jesus and settled there. Historical discrepancies aside, from here Martha would go to Tarascon where she would do battle with the monstrous Tarasque. But Martha herself is revered outside of France as well. In the town of Villajoyosa in Spain, there is a yearly festival dedicated to Martha, who supposedly saved their village in 1538. The coastal town was being targeted by pirates and the villagers prayed for help. In response, an apparition of Martha appeared and summoned a flood that destroyed the pirate ships and washed them away. Fun fact, Medea appears to be immune from divine retribution. In her myth, she is consistently an agent of death to those who have either wronged Jason or herself, and yet time and again she remains unpunished by the gods. Keep in mind, some Greek heroes are damned for simply attempting to do something, such as Pirithous, or are harassed by the gods for things that seem petty in comparison to the good that they brought, such as Odysseus. Medea, however, kills her own brother and chops him up, convinces two princesses to kill their own father, and then also kills Jason's would-be mistress and her father, who was also a king. Finally, she kills her and Jason's children and escapes not by running away, but on the divine chariot of Helios. Helios is believed to be the reason why she receives this divine protection, given that he is her grandfather. That said, divine parentage doesn't seem to matter for many other heroes, so why it does here is unknown. Fun fact, Caster Gilles is not a heroic spirit. Kind of. Gilles de Rais technically does not qualify for the caster class. He himself was not a magician or a magus of any sort of repute, merely dabbling in the dark arts for one reason or another. Fate, as well as history, claim that he did this to alleviate his quickly emptying coffers. As such, he is no more a caster than I am an assassin. He takes all of his magical abilities from the grimoire of his acquaintance, Francois Prelati. That said, him being summoned in such a state allows him the basic traits of his class. Another fun note is his iconic bulging eyes. These are, unironically, drawn because he is hitting the awuga staring at Jean, and is meant to contrast against a more handsome, casual look he had as a general. Fun fact, Hans was once the romantic partner of a German duke. Hans' sexuality is a pretty hot topic for some historians, but there is a veritable mountain of evidence to suggest that he was, at the very least, bisexual. At one point in his life, he and Karl Alexander, the Grand Duke of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, formed a strong and possibly romantic bond. Anderson has letters addressing both his attraction to the Duke as well as potential romantic scenes between the two. However, after war broke out, this relationship seemed to break off as well. This sexual preference may influence partly why he treats Chiara as he does in Fate. Chiara being a combination of overt sexuality while also being an adoring fan of his, while Hans has no interest in her and finds her over-adoration to be smothering. Side note, supposedly, according to a translation of Lost Belt 6 material, Hans was supposed to appear as an Earth Clan fairy named Tom Tit, but this was scrapped for unknown reasons. Fun fact, there is a fringe theory that William Shakespeare was actually 3 different people. This theory puts forth the idea that Shakespeare's different eras were all done by different people, all using the moniker of Shakespeare. Believers in this theory point to us having little in the way of verifiable evidence about Shakespeare's life and differences in the various various writing styles. This is, of course, almost guaranteed untrue. What is true though is that Shakespeare is responsible for the creation of the name Jessica. This name first appeared in this written form with this spelling in the Merchant of Venice, though this was more him anglicizing pre-existing biblical names, rather than outright pulling a new name. He is also often credited with the inventions of the names Olivia and Miranda, though these names were more so popularized by his works rather than being outright invented by him. Fun fact, Mephistopheles' horns are fake. Rather than them jutting from his head, they are actually an ornamental part of his hat. This isn't the only weird design choice with Mephisto. As opposed to his legend, Mephistopheles, as he appears in Fate, is not a demon, but rather a homunculus. Another discrepancy is his weapon of choice, a bomb and a pair of scissors. While these seem kind of weird and out of place on first glance, they are both symbolic of the tale of Faust. Scissors are a long-standing symbol for severing the ties of fate all the way back to the ancient Greeks and probably further. In entering a pact with Mephistopheles, Faust severed the lines of his soul to enter heaven. Bombs are a bit easier to understand because they literally tick down to an explosive conclusion. This is, once again, symbolic of Faust's life ticking away till his soul is claimed by the devil. Fun fact, while most likely coincidental, Mozart's in-game art resembles that of a saint that he was supposedly named after, Wolfgang of Regensburg, though I may be making this comparison simply because of Mozart's stained glass aesthetic. This is intentional as his design was meant to evoke such a feeling. Mozart's artist, P. Falls, remarks that Mozart's overall design is one based on different depictions of Mozart, drawing largely from his appearances in films, such as his coat being a reference to the one that his father wears in the movie Amadeus. Other aspects that are maybe a bit more well known are his clawed fingers. This is meant to be symbolic of his connection with one of the demon god pillars that he could have become had he decided to answer the call. Fun fact, at one point in his development as a Fate Servant, Waver was possibly one of the worst units. In the very early days of FGO, Waver's kit was similar to how it is now with one major exception. None of his skills gave NP charge. This in and of itself doesn't make his kit necessarily bad, as the attack and defense up were still pretty good and the 50% crit damage was definitely better. His NP used to just reduce gauge and curse people as well with a chance to stun, but there was still one problem: pages. Waver was available from the start of the game, and pages did not become available to practically farm until London. Waver needs 5 pages for his 4th skill and 10 for his 5th, and 10 more just to reach his 3rd ascension. While today 55 pages may not seem so bad, back then this made him functionally unusable. These problems were so persistently bad for such a beloved character that they were hotfixed just 3 months later to add the NP charge to all of his skills. Fun fact, Caster Q actually has 3 noble phantasms. The first is the one that we see in game, the Wicker Man, which summons a massive flaming golem with a cage at its center who actively seeks those to offer to the gods. His second noble phantasm is called Oktudug Odin, and is essentially a magical nuke. It uses the effect of 18 different ruins simultaneously to explode over a large area. This magical detonation is extremely lethal, but even if you do manage to survive, it debuffs you, functionally sealing away any magical abilities, buffs, or noble phantasms for a time. His third NP is Gabentine Valhalla, which creates a well of dense magical energy that can create a barrier for dispelling curses. This spell is incredibly potent, but can only be performed through sacrifice, and in this case, it is done by removing one of his eyes. Fun fact, Sasaki Kojiro, as he appears in Fate, is very similar to Robin Hood. By this, I mean that he is not actually Sasaki Kojiro. Rather, he is just a person who is able to perform the Tsubame Gaish. This is because there is no proven factual Kojiro to have ever lived, much in the same way that Robin Hood is possibly real but unverifiable. Therefore, Sasaki Kojiro is more akin to a title reserved for Japanese men throughout history who have had the potential to perform the Tsubame Gaish. With that said, it does appear that with manifesting under the title, they inherit certain traits familiar with the Kojiro legend, such as memories of their defeat at the hands of Miyamoto Musashi. Fun fact, Cursed Arm Hassan has a limited number of dirks. His preferred method of attack is with his throwing knives, with which he is lethally precise. However, he is unable to recollect them through magical means. This means that after every fight, Cursed Arm has to scour the area to reclaim his own knives, which is kind of a cute thought. What isn't a cute thought is how his noble phantasm, Zavania, actually works. This is a terrifying attack that crushes a person's heart without even touching it, creating a mirror image of the organ in his hands before destroying it. In a sense, this is a more advanced version of Tamlin Tristan's noble phantasm, which operates by creating a voodoo doll of sorts, but requires a part of the body to form the link. Fun fact, Jing Ke's massive thighs are actually emphasized to the degree that they are for historical reasons. Kind of. In the ill-fated assassination attempt of Emperor Shi Huangdi, Jing Ke narrowly missed killing the ruler by just a matter of a few steps. What resulted afterwards was an almost comically Looney Tunes-style chase scene with Jing Ke attempting to get the emperor. In the resulting struggle, a doctor threw his medical bag at Jing Ke, stunning him, and a different thrown object slashed Jing Ke's thigh. In a final desperate attempt to kill the emperor, he threw his poisoned knife at him, which again narrowly missed. This slash on the thigh was the excuse the artist needed to give her such emphasized parts. Fun Fun fact, Samson is one of the most confusing characters historically in Chaldea. Not because he is exceptionally unknown, but because the game seems to have merged him and his son into one person. Samson Sr. was the very first executioner to use the guillotine, and was integral in its examination, testing, and eventual approval. He executed nearly 3,000 people, including Louis XVI and Charlotte Corday. However, it was Samson Jr. who executed Marie Antoinette. The Samson that we have in Chaldea, however, seems to have the memories of both Samsons and acts as though he was the one who carried out these executions. The obvious reasoning for this is that it likely originated from a translation error, as the two share the same name. But fate does verify that this is supposed to be the 4th generation executioner, which is not the one who killed Marie Antoinette. Fun fact, the Phantom of the Opera is based on a true story. Kind of. The original author of the novel, Gaston Leroux, was inspired by mystery and horror writers such as Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle. This culminated in his first novel, The Mystery of the Yellow Room, but he wanted something more. At this time, he learned of the rumors surrounding the Palais Garnier Opera House, and the ghost that supposedly wandered its rafters. Supposedly, after it had been updated with electric lighting, during an encore of the first act of the opera Hell, a wire holding a light fell and killed one person and injured several others. This inspired Leroux to write his most famous tale. Other aspects of the tale that seem unusual but are real is the existence of a cistern beneath the building. Fun fact, Mata Hari was initially planned to attack with her clothing. According to her designer, Koyama, he thought that she would use the long parts of her sleeves to attack opponents. Of course, due to limitations at the time, she was instead redesigned to shoot caster balls, which she still does to this day. Now, this clothing attack may happen if she ever gets a future animation update. Speaking of Koyama, they have stated that, at least at first, they found Mata Hari's personality to be so upbeat and positive that they didn't think impurely of her despite how she is drawn. There was also a timeline where Mata Hari would have been tan-skinned to go with her dancer outfit, but this was scrapped as well. Despite this, we now have the Sunshine Onesan we all know and love today. Fun fact, Carmilla's noble phantasm, Phantom Maiden, is not a real torture device. Based on the Iron Maiden, the original was from Nuremberg. It was made more as a display piece, but real devices similar to this do exist. While Carmilla would have used the spikes for draining blood, the more classical version of this, called the Schadenmantel, were more used for degradation purposes, which I suppose still fits her dominatrix theme. These were usually made of wood and trapped the victim from the base of the thigh to the neck, which meant that they had no use of their arms, had to hobble about to go anywhere, and were forced to defecate inside the device, making them stink. I doubt that they washed these very thoroughly after each use as well, so you would be wallowing in the filth of others too. Fun fact, Lancelot's name may have originally been Alan-a-Lot. Historians don't have a single agreed upon origin of the famed knight's name, but one proposed origin comes from the Scythians. He would have been named Alanus, not because his name was Alan, but from the Alan people, which were a nomadic race from the medieval era. Lot, by comparison, is not a personal name, but rather meant to represent the river Lot in France. Together you get Alan-a-Lot, or Alan from Lot. The lance aspect of his name follows this same pattern, not being associated with the weapon, but more likely the Old Welsh word for lake, Ulwich, a word with no vowels. Given Lancelot's connection to lakes, this makes sense, as his name would then mean the lake man from the river Lot. Fun fact, Lubu the Berserker was originally going to have a design that looked closer to what we have for red hair. In his initial conception, he was going to be a centaur with the lower half presumably of red hair and the upper half of the Lubu that we know today. However, this proved to be too difficult to implement at the time. A different angle was taken in which Lubu would instead be a mech, a robot loyal to Rani due to her resemblance to his wife, but this also proved to be too difficult, giving us the Lubu that we have today. While these, as far as I am aware, are unconfirmed, we do see these concepts getting reused at a later time. The aforementioned red hair is likely close to the initial Takeuchi centaur concept, save for the horse head to differentiate him. Another that is much more true to what the original concept may have looked like would be Zhang Yu, who is both a mech and also a centaur, and given the complexity of his design, it is no wonder that the concept may have been shelved. Fun fact, Spartacus should, in theory, be unkillable in longer fights. Spartacus's noble phantasm, Warmonger's Cry, is a constantly active NP that directly converts damage to his body into magical energy. Combining this with Spartacus's natural inclination to throw himself directly into the line of fire to absorb damage means that as the enemy slowly chips away at his body, he is more accurately being sculpted into a stronger form. In reality, most of the damage that he receives is completely ineffective thanks to his insane physique, but he's even stronger than that. The strategy to deal with Spartacus in a standard Holy Grail war would be to have your servant hit them with their strongest noble phantasm at the very start, as at that point he is at his weakest. However, this comes with a risk as well, namely that his noble phantasm, when met with a significantly more powerful force, will grow in proportion to this force. Essentially, unless you can guarantee that he will be vaporized, Spartacus is theoretically one of the strongest servants to summon.